Look at Adaku, the most beautiful girl in our village, whom great men had come to marry, only to pick a poor carpenter. This is what the community will always say about Adaku whenever she goes out to fetch water or firewood. Once upon a time, there lived a man called Kalu. Kalu was always called poor even by the poorest of the poor in the community. Kalu will always walk barefooted as his family could only afford one slippers which he shares with his wife and 6 children. Kalu was so poor that the entire community would never invite him for an event because they think he has nothing to offer. You could tell from his look that his family was hopeless. But Kalu never stopped believing that one day his situation will change. Kalu's hope was on his children, as he has invested most of his money on his children. Kalu was blessed with 6 children. Adaku was the third child. Adaku was extremely beautiful that young men were already booking to marry her while in her tender age. But Kalu would always laugh at their request, saying, "I will only give Adaku out to a very rich and wealthy man." Kalu believed his only hope of getting out of poverty was his children, and would always vow never to give his daughter out to a poor man in marriage. Adaku grew up and was exceptionally beautiful, that the whole community would always sing her praise. Her skin was as smooth as that of a glass. Adaku was so beautiful that people traveled from neighboring village just to see her. Adaku was so beautiful that the poor and rejected Kalu household became a tourist ground for young and wealthy men seeking for her hand in marriage. Kalu, who was not in an hurry to give Adaku out, was looking for the highest bidder. Kalu will move around the whole village telling anyone who cared to listen about his beautiful daughter. Adaku was so attractive that every young man's dream in the village was to marry her. Adaku, who was not moved by her beautiful body and the numerous suitors who were coming around. She was so beautiful that men were willing to rescue and kill themselves for her sake in order to win her heart. The whole village maidens were so jealous of Adaku, as all the young men in the village are now attracted to Adaku's beauty. Kalu, who only believed the only way he could get out of the poverty he was in was to look for a wealthy suitors for Adaku. So many men were coming, but Kalu will always shut the door at them, saying they are poor and they don't deserve to have his daughter as a wife. For months, Kalu was selecting until he was able to come up with 15 lists of wealthy men he would want the daughter to marry. So Kalu asked all the men to come as Adaku was instructed to make a choice out of the 15 men Kalu had picked. All the wealthy men Kalu had picked came and Adaku was instructed to pick a choice out of the 15 men. Adaku, on sighting all the men, refused to pick any of them, saying, "None of them is my choice." Kalu, on hearing this, was extremely sad and was unhappy. Kalu tried to convince Adaku, saying, "This is our only escape route out of poverty." "Adaku, my daughter, you have no choice. It's either you pick one or have me to contend with," said Kalu. Adaku replied by saying, "Daddy, all these men here are not my choice. When I find a man I truly love, I will bring him home." Kalu, who was so sad and angry, asked all the men to go and told Adaku that it's either you bring a man that can liberate this family out of poverty or have me to contend with for the rest of your life, said Kalu. Adaku, who was not moved by his father's threat, decided to look for a man she truly loves. Most of the young men in the village were scared to approach Adaku because Adaku's father was more interested in men that have money. One day, Adaku was going to the stream to fetch water Suddenly, she got bitten by a snake. Adaku fell to the floor and was calling for help. Some of the village maidens who heard her ran there to see who was calling for help. The moment they discovered it was Adaku, they refused to help her because they feel she was the reason the village men no longer give them attention. So they decided to leave her there to die. Adaku was lying helpless but kept on shouting and calling for help even though her voice was already going. Suddenly, Ikenna, the carpenter who was in the forest searching for wood, heard the voice reaching out for help. Ikenna ran there and saw Adaku lying down helpless. Ikenna knew Adaku was bitten by a snake. Ikenna brought out a sharp object and cut the point Adaku had been bitten by the snake. Ikenna also used a rope to tie that spot to stop the poison from spreading. Then he carried Adaku on his shoulder home. Ikenna got to Adaku's house and told Adaku's parents everything that has happened in the stream. Adaku's parents thanked him and Ikenna went back to his carpentry workshop. Ikenna was one of the most respected youths in the village, who will never indulge in crime and was always contented with the little he had. Ikenna always believed that whatever is not yours can never be yours even if you take it by force. It will surely go back to where it belongs. He was always dedicated to his work and always believed that one day God will shine his light upon him. 2 weeks later, after the snake bite, Adaku decided to visit Ikenna's workshop to appreciate him. Ikenna was so happy on seeing Adaku as no beautiful girl has ever visited his carpentry workshop. Ikenna, who was already aging, has asked so many girls in the village to marry him but was always turned down because he was poor. Adaku got into the workshop. On sighting Ikenna, she fell in love immediately. She saw a quality in him that no man who have been coming to her house to ask for a hand in marriage has. Ikenna, on the other hand, on sighting Adaku, fell in love immediately, but was afraid to ask her out because he thought Adaku wouldn't like him because he was a poor carpenter. Ikenna summoned courage and took a step and asked Adaku to marry him. Adaku, on hearing this, was so excited as Ikenna has everything she wants in a man. Adaku quickly accepted Ikenna's proposal and asked Ikenna to go and see her parents immediately. Ikenna, who was super excited, decided to see Kalu immediately to make his intention known. Ikenna quickly rushed into Kalu's compound to meet Kalu, to tell Kalu about his intention to marry his daughter. Kalu, on hearing what Ikenna has to say, sent him out of his house immediately, shouting, "I will only give my daughter to a wealthy man, not a poor carpenter like you." Ikenna felt humiliated and embarrassed and was walking out of the house, only for Adaku to shout, "Papa, Ikenna is my choice and you have nothing to do about it." Kalu replied in anger by saying, "Over my dead body will I join this union." Ikenna, on hearing this, left the house in tears, only for Adaku to pick up her bags and followed Ikenna. Kalu, who was very angry, shouted, "Adaku, where do you think you are going to? Come back here." Only for Adaku to reply by saying, "Papa, it's either you join us together or forget about me for life. I am not a commodity that is meant to be sold," said Adaku. Adaku picked up her things and followed Ikenna. Kalu, who was filled with greed, shouted, "From today henceforth, you cease to be my daughter. I will not forgive you for this shame you brought upon my household." "I regret having you as a daughter," said Kalu. Adaku's sister, Chichi, also supported her father to rain curse on Adaku. Adaku wasn't concerned about money but happiness. She found true happiness in Ikenna and decided to follow Ikenna even when the father wouldn't give his blessings. Few years later, Adaku's sister got married to Ezego, which means king of money. Her parents were so happy with her as she brought home a wealthy rich man, not like Adaku, who decided to follow a poor carpenter. Adaku's parents disowned her and stopped her from visiting the family house as she was tagged an embarrassment to the family. Chichi, on the other hand, was always celebrated for bringing home a wealthy rich man. Adaku was always insulted by the entire village for saying no to wealthy men and following a carpenter. But Adaku wasn't worried at all as she believes life isn't all about money. She would always manage the little a poor carpenter husband could afford and she was extremely happy. 5 years later, Adaku's sister's husband, Ezego, got arrested for drug trafficking and all his properties were seized and he was given life imprisonment. Chichi, who would always insult Adaku, came back to the village with nothing and had to join farm work to survive. Ikenna, Adaku's husband, who was always diligent in his work, got a carpentry job in the king's palace. While Ikenna was working, someone shouted his name, Ikenna, and he turned back, only to see an old-time classmate called Sule. Sule was the dullest student in Ikenna's class while at high school, and on numerous occasions, Ikenna would always assist Sule in mathematics and English language. The whole class refused to interact with Sule because Sule was extremely dull. The only person who was going close to Sule back then at high school was Ikenna. Ikenna, on seeing Sule, was extremely happy and was filled with joy. And Sule shouted, Ikenna, where have you been? I've been looking for you for more than 20 years. Ikenna was extremely happy on seeing Sule and replied, I've been around, my friend. And Ikenna said, Sule, what are you doing in this poor village? Only for Sule to reply by saying, I'm here to see the king. I'm planning on opening a refinery in this village. And I am glad my bosom friend is here. I'm going to make you the manager of the refinery when the refinery have started working. Ikenna, on hearing this, was extremely happy and was filled with joy. The refinery was opened and Ikenna was made the manager of a refinery in the village. To the surprise of everyone in the village, who would have thought poor carpenter Ikenna would amount to something. And in no time, Adaku traveled to the United States to further her education. Chichi and her father, Kalu, came to apologize to Ikenna and Adaku for the poor treatment. They were forgiven and the whole family now live as one.